Mhm.
as well as Hinkley Point C nuclear power. James is currently working for the European institutions. He's also carrying out a doctoral research project into archival policy towards email in conjunction with Loughborough University and the National Archives. James is also the author of Thinking Records blog and presenter of the IRMS podcast series. James, to you.
Well, thank you very much, Arif. Hello, everybody. Um, just so email's been around for a quarter of a century, but the context of email, I think, is really changing quite rapidly. And I'd like, first of all, to just think about how we as information professionals see email, because hold on, there's two alternative metaphors we can use to think of email. We can think of it as a black hole, an information black hole that we as information professionals can do nothing with, and information is effectively lost in there. Or we can think of it as a high value but high risk corporate data set. Neither of those metaphors is completely right or completely wrong. Both of those give insights into email and the information management challenges it poses, but both give a very different diagnosis of the challenge we face and a very different set of ideas on how we should tackle those challenges. And I think there is plenty of scope for confusion among non-information professionals, partly because we as information professionals don't all look at this in the same way. Having said that, it's in some ways good that we've got these different ways of looking at it, because it does give us a variety of different approaches that we can adopt. So if we think of of email systems as a black hole, that in a couple of ways that ties with our experience. The first way is that when you're new to a post, your predecessor's correspondence is in that black hole, yeah, because it's not visible to you. You can't access it, you can't use it. And the second way that it's like a black hole is for us as information professionals. You know, many of you have got skills in building taxonomies, in designing metadata schema, in configuring information systems. You've probably never been asked to use them on an email system, because an email system doesn't need an information professional to configure it. An email system is effectively pre-configured with a preset structure. So to us as professionals, it might as well be a black hole because our skills are not utilized in that environment. However, there are limitations, and so the solution, if we see email systems as a black hole, then we've got three alternative solutions to offer our organizations. We can either tell individuals to move important emails out of that black hole into another system, or we can tell our colleagues or advise our colleagues to use email less and make more use of other communications channels, or we can train machines to identify important emails and move them out of the email system, right? So there's three alternative solutions. And the thing to note about those alternative solutions is none of them is easy. All of them would need a radical change or a huge input of organizational effort and energy to actually achieve that. which I guess comes back to the black hole analogy. It's very difficult to get things out of a black hole. Yeah, we don't even know whether we can get things out of a black hole. And those three solutions, I don't know of any organization that's actually been able to do any of those three things on a corporate scale with their email. Okay, so the alternative metaphor is to see email as a high value, high risk data set. And that also ties in with some of our perception of reality. For example, the value that an individual gets out of the correspondence in their own email account, and the value that email has had as records to adjudicate and to help public inquiries to come to conclusions, to help auditors come to conclusions, to help investigators come to conclusions, to help courts of law come to conclusions. It also ties in with our experience perhaps of e-discovery systems, which e-discovery systems cover more than just email, but they're very much centered around email. They're very much that what they offer to a legal team is essentially the ability to say, okay, what matter are we interested? Who was working on it? Okay, what date range? Let bring me back all the emails related from those people within that date range and let me process them. And if we see an email system as a high value, high risk corporate database set, then we're no longer looking to move email out of that data set, because we know that all data lives within a data structure. We're no longer thinking that the organization of correspondence by individual is inherently a bad thing. It's just the organizing principle of that particular type of data set. Every different data set has a different organizing principle. But what we are very mindful of is that because the traffic goes from individual to individual or individuals, it does give that illusion of privacy, and conversation it can be unguarded, and therefore this is a very high risk data set. And the approaches suggested by viewing an email system as a high risk, high value data set are more incremental. They're less revolutionary than the solutions suggested by the black hole metaphor. It's more about, well, how do we identify the particularly risky content, and how do we go about trying to get more value out of the fact that email keeps a very detailed and very regular and very consistent correspondence records of people's activity. I mentioned the context around email is changing, and I think one of the three key recent changes I want to pick out. The first of them is the rise of Microsoft Teams, because Microsoft Teams is, I think, the first real, I wouldn't say challenger to email, but the first thing that's really got into organizations and taken a decent chunk of correspondence away from email, especially internal correspondence. And this new thing, Teams, should also help us check one of the hopes, if you like, one of the dreams of the idea of moving correspondence out of email, is the idea that if we could get people to communicate in shared areas through a communication channel that accumulates correspondence in a shared area, then correspondence would be much more manageable than in an individual aggregation like an email account. So what have we learned? I mean, Teams, the last 18 months, it's come to prominence. What have we learned about that? And I think what we've learned is that a lot of organizations have rolled out Microsoft Teams in the hope that they'd move correspondence to a shared area. But when you actually look at Teams, it's actually two things. It's providing you with Teams channel, and each Teams channel is a shared space for a group of people to make postings that are instantly viewable by the whole of the team. And it's a chat application which gives every individual an individual Teams chat client through which they can send messages to other individuals. Okay. So what's been very interesting has been the breakdown as to where the traffic has gone, right? And the statistics that I've seen from organizations so far and the anecdotal evidence of conversations I've had suggests that for every 100,000 messages posted into Teams channels, there is 1 million messages going through Teams chat. So that is, in other words, an order of magnitude of traffic higher is going through Teams chat rather than Teams channels, which I think is starting to tell us something about the nature of correspondence in the digital age. And it's starting to tell us, I think, that the natural way for correspondence to be ordered in the digital age is in an individual aggregation that's specific to an individual. And I think that's due to the nature of messages themselves. A message is different. You could say a message is a type of document, but it's a very specific type of document. I mean, what you're doing with a message is you're trying to bring some information to the attention of one or more people. And what we all instinctively know is the best way to bring that information to the attention of an individual is to send it to them directly, address it to them directly. So there's like a Pavlovian reaction. We get attuned to our colleagues, and how do we correspond in a way that that they respond to quickly? And in the Teams environment, you get quicker response if you send messages through Teams chat, because that's to their individual. They know that, oh, this message is for me, rather than into a group chat where one of several people could reply to it. So I think Teams very strongly suggests to us that whilst it is possible to move large chunks of correspondence out of the email environment, which is something many information professionals have wanted for a long time, it is not possible, or does not seem to be possible, on a corporate-wide basis to move significant chunks of correspondence out of individual aggregations. Yeah, because the Teams chat correspondence is, if you're using the black hole analogy, a Teams chat is just as another type of black hole. Yeah, if you want that analogy. And I think Teams poses we're really gonna have to think hard as information professionals about what Teams chat means, what Teams means to us, because a lot of us over the past quarter of a century, a lot of our work has been around configuring systems, right? And one of the types of system that needs the most configuring in an organization is a corporate document management and collaboration system. Yeah. And Teams is the first messaging system to really eat into that space, right? So when you look at what Teams is biting into, if you've got many Office 365 users would have used SharePoint as their main document management collaboration system, right? And SharePoint needs an awful lot of configuration, and that's good for us as information professionals, isn't it? Because it lets us use all of those skills of building structures, setting up metadata schema, building vocabularies, deploying vocabularies, training people, right? Now, email and Teams chat require no configuration, no input from us, and Teams channels is right in the middle between the two. Right? There are design choices to be made. Who do we give Teams to? How big should we make the membership? How many channels should we have? What should we call them? So there are configuration choices, but it's not nearly as configurable as SharePoint. There's no overall structure. There's no overarching structure above a team. So there's no visible information architecture. Every team is a silo. There's no metadata to set up and configure. It is a platform, so there's plenty you can add on to it. So there's opportunities for us there. But I think the key thing is, even though there are things you can do in the Teams environment as an information professional, and even though it is much better if an organization uses information professionals to roll out Teams than doesn't, what I think we need to be aware of is that many organizations have chosen not to take an information application that you could roll out really quickly if you wanted to. And many organizations have. So what that's doing is it's reducing the amount of space we have as information professionals to configure systems, right? Now, there are many different responses we can make to that as individuals, as a profession, but I think one approach we need to work on is to say, well, okay, if what is happening is that more and more of the volume of correspondence and documentation of an organization is going to be sitting within systems that are either like Teams chat and email that require no configuration, or like Teams that require much less configuration than the previous generation of document management and collaboration systems, then we are going to have to refocus our efforts, because our organizations are still going to need information management input. The complexity of managing information is not removed by Teams, by simplifying systems like Teams and Teams chat. It's just shifted. Yeah, and so how do we react to that shift? Well, we have to develop as a profession ways in which we manage information that's not kept in systems that we had input into. Yeah, in other words, it's coming in after the fact to think, okay, how do we make sense of this? How do we apply rules in this environment? And the other example of this is shared drives, where analytics started being deployed to sort out shared drives, and I think we're going to have to take that approach across even our main document management systems in future, because when you look at this graph as well, what I notice is that you can configure a corporate-wide document management system as well as you like, but what you can't do is attract most of the communications through it. So what the less, in general, I know it's a sweeping messaging system. About when we look at a lot of things,
James,
it changes our relationship to supply.
Do you mind if I interrupt? We're having problems with the audio. It keeps dropping out.
Competitive price is really, really low. I mean, effectively, there's 2 cloud suites out there by two big US giants, and therefore, and in the UK, it's Microsoft that are dominant, and therefore, Microsoft's view of email is something that we need to take account of, especially given that the cloud suites are so rapidly changing, and you haven't got an update, a decision whether to accept or not updates. It just changes under your feet. So Microsoft clearly do not view an email system as a black hole. When you look at how they've set up the different applications in the 365 suite, 2 things you notice. First of all, there is no provision to help individuals move emails or Teams chat into a system like SharePoint that we may have configured with our information architecture, our desired information architecture, right? So in 365, it's a collection of equal applications. There's parity of esteem for all the applications. No drag and drop from email to SharePoint or anywhere else. And the second is that Microsoft Exchange, the email system in the 365 suite, is seen not just as a repository for email, but also a repository for all messages in all the Microsoft native applications in the suite. Yammer's a bit of an exception because Yammer was obviously a bought system that they're integrating in gradually. So they're viewing the email system Exchange as the message repository, and SharePoint and OneDrive as the document repository in this cloud suite. They're not looking to move messages into the document area. They're not or vice versa. When you look at the retention model in Office 365, the basic retention model is that administrators set default retention policies on the natural aggregations across the suite, which natural aggregation in SharePoint is a site, the natural aggregation in OneDrive is a OneDrive account, the natural aggregation in email is an email account, in Teams it's Teams chat account and Teams channels. So all of those aggregations, the administrators can set default rules saying, okay, by default, this is how long this whole type of aggregations or this particular one of those types of aggregation should be kept. And then the administrator can also make available to end users labels, which can also have retention policies that the individuals can apply to a document if they want it, or a message if they want it to have a different retention rule than the aggregation it's been put in, right? So this is a type of model that does not rely on a very well crafted information architecture. It's the type of model that can be applied to what I'd call suboptimal information architectures, where you have aggregations like email, which everyone would agree are less than ideal for applying retention and access rules to. And this is Microsoft's first stab at a retention model for that. It's a model that needs considerable work. The way they've set it up is incredibly messy, with lots of different conflicting rules that Microsoft sort out, with 4 kind of triage rules that determine which rule gets prominence, which they have determined and which the organization cannot change. And I think that will cause problems over time. But I think I'm talking, the records management section of the information management profession, perhaps we have to take a little bit of responsibility for some of the weaknesses that I think will become apparent in the way that Microsoft have executed on this model, because we haven't put a lot of thought into how you apply retention models in suboptimal systems like all messaging systems. We've done a lot more work on how you apply retention models in systems like electronic document management systems that you can configure with an optimal information architecture. The last of the 3 changes that we need to look at is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And if you look at the way AI works in the Microsoft 365 suite, what you have is end users using the different applications within the suite. And everything an end user does in any of those applications sends a signal to Microsoft Graph. So if I send an email to a colleague, the Microsoft Graph gets a signal that I, James Lappin, have sent an email with an attachment, and the email and attachment is about such and such a topic, perhaps, and it links me and the person. It links me to the other person and to the topics discussed in whatever I've sent to that other person, right? And that graph builds up and builds up as people use the various applications. And Microsoft's AI, Dell came in a few years ago, and Project Cortex just late last year. Those 2 AI, the AI within the suite uses all those signals to push recommendations back to the end user, and to sort of share search results, and obviously Project Cortex, as it goes through, will build more and more on those signals in Microsoft's Graph. So what that's telling me is that almost, whereas in the past we may have thought of email as being something that, well, the email's sitting there and we're getting no knowledge management benefits out of it. We might get some compliance benefits out of it. We might get some legal benefits if we have to defend a court case, but we're not getting any knowledge sharing benefits out of it. That was until this came along, because it's actually in this model, the messaging systems like Teams chat and email are much more useful and much more informative to this AI than the document management systems, because a message ties together who, what, and when, and how often, in a ways that document systems just don't. And of course, the messaging systems have that huge volume, which we also know that AI models like, whereas the document management systems have a much smaller volume of information. Now, that AI there comes with 365, and there's a few parameters you can set. You can switch it on or off, but basically you're not doing a lot with it. Microsoft have provided it to you, and and it helps search, but there's 2 things it won't do. It won't help you with retention, and I really don't see Microsoft impinging on your retention. They've got no interest in doing that. And it doesn't it doesn't tackle the black hole problem in the sense that it only lets you have access to what you have access to, if you know what I mean. It doesn't so and so communicates a lot with so and so, or communicate a document. It won't push you, say, an email.
James.
It does leave us.
James,
yeah,
sorry.
am I breaking up?
Yeah, you are. I'm not sure what to do. Maybe you could just
Shall I
turn your
carry on,
video
or
off.
turn my video off? Okay. I might have to stop screen sharing to. Oh yeah, stop video. Is that better?
Yeah, it might be.
Okay.
Sounds good so far.
Great. Also, how are we doing for time? Do you want the break now, or do you want the break after I've done the last section of the talk? I can't see a clock, you see, because I've got my. Oh, it's for 7. Okay, I'm going to finish the talk, and it'll take me 5 more minutes, and then we'll have a break.
Excellent, thank you.
So, in this, we have still got the challenge that I think we can only tackle with AI of how do we get knowledge sharing benefit out of the vast stores of emails that our organization accumulates. Now, in order to tackle this problem, I think we need to know 3 things. I think we need to think about the capabilities of machines, what they're good at and not good at. The capabilities of humans, because humans must always be in the loop, especially with emails. And we need to understand what is actually in email accounts and what we need to know in order to manage them better. So if you look at an email account, right, it's really, you can break it into 3. About half of the correspondence in a typical email account arises from the business activities of the individual account holder. Yeah, actions they're taking within their sphere of action to push forward their remit, right? And that's the 50% that's of value, right? The other 50% is of no value to the organization as a whole, not within that person's account anyway. So of the rest of the email account, the largest part is what I've called here non-business emails. And by that, they're mainly about work matters, but they're about work matters outside of the sphere of action of the individual, outside of their remit. The individual might be on a mailing list. They might be, they will be sent lots of emails about what the organization is doing and what their next annual plan is, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some of it might be social, right? And there, even if an individual determines to be absolutely an email to a friend from their email account, even if they stick to that, they'll still have emails about them as a person, for instance, from their HR department or their line manager. So that will always be there. And it's that small bit of personal information that is preventing organizations from allowing the successor in post to access all that business correspondence that's within the account. And it's that small bit, that small percentage of personal information that's making email accounts seem to us like a black hole, right? So here, what I'm going to propose, what I'm going to run up a flagpole now is a 6-step roadmap for email. And I'm doing it to promote debate, if you like, as to what business logic we should use about applying machine learning to email. I'm going to use the assumption that when we ask human beings to do things, their scarce resource is time, right? So we don't want human beings to have to act on big chunks of their own email because they haven't got the time, right? They're getting too many emails, they haven't got the time. So I want the end users only to be called into act by exception, right? And then with machines, I'm going to make the assumption that we haven't got a lot of labeled data out there. So we haven't got nice email collections from our staff, which are all labeled with what business activity each email comes from. So we haven't got the labeled data to really train a machine. So to train the machine, we're going to have to be using, we might be using the end users to train the machine. And I'm going to make the assumption that we cannot train the machine reliably in a big taxonomy, much as we'd like to, because we haven't got enough labeled data to train them in the taxonomy, and we can't get our individual end users to train them in a taxonomy, because that would mean us training the end users in a taxonomy, and end users aren't very good at applying taxonomies. Okay, so, and the other assumption I'm going to make is that machine learning capability is going to grow over time. So, and I'm going to use that as a strength, not a weakness, because the fact that it grows over time means that we can take an incremental approach, knowing that the capability is going to get better. And the incremental approach is suitable to a high risk environment like email. We're not going to want to do anything radical with email and machine learning because the risks are so high, the volume's so high. Retention rule. As an information governance team or as an information management team, set a retention rule on the whole account based on the value of the business correspondence. So when you're setting a retention rule on correspondence, ignore on an email account, ignore the fact that it's got trivial and personal email in, because we're going to use machine learning to identify that and reduce it and get rid of it. And we're going to take a Pascalian bet that within a normal retention period frame, so normal retention period, what, 7 years is normal. You can go lower or higher than that, but in that time frame, we should be able to use machine learning to get rid of that trivial and personal email. So our retention rule only needs to take account of the business email, which is the stuff we actually want. Yeah. Now, let's start off with the end user. With the end user, we only want them to act by exception, right? So the best thing we can, and we also want them to act, they're only going to act when it's in their interests. So we need to appeal to their self-interest, minimize their time, and set them something really simple. So the simple thing that I think ties with their self-interest is we should say to them, here is a way, give them a simple way of flagging up email that's personal to them. Yep. And my definition of that is flag up any email that you wouldn't want your successor in post to inherit. Yep. And then go on to step 3, which is to ask end users for their consent to allow their successor in post to access their non-personal emails, i.e. everything that they haven't flagged up as personal. Right? Now, I fully predict that end users won't flag 100% of their personal email, and many of them won't give their consent to allow their successor in post to access their non-personal email. Okay. But it starts us down the road of getting our organizations to think of an email account as something that can be inheritable, that we can treat as a record keeping resource. So now let's bring in the machines. Now with the machines, what I'm wanting them to do, I'm wanting to set them tasks that are simple distinction tasks, ideally binary distinctions. That's what they're good at. I don't want to be teaching them a big taxonomy. The good thing about machines is they scale a lot. So we don't have to be email. We can get them to think of about every email. So what I'd like the machines to be set as the first task is separate out the business emails from that person's remit, which is what we want to keep as a record, from their non-business email, from everything that comes through their account that isn't related to their role, their remit. Yeah, it's a binary distinction. There's lots of ways we could train the machine. You could ask individuals for a short period of time to flag up everything that's non-business, or you could ask individuals to flag up the people that correspond with them that are either business or non-business. How you do it, there'll be lots of different ways, but that's what I think the first step we should ask machines to do. So if you notice that so far we've really minimized the risk. The biggest risk with any intervention we make in email is that we make private or confidential emails available somewhere. So far, we've done none of that. This is keeping emails within an email account, but it's just enabling us to get more and more sure that we can separate out the business emails that we really want to keep. Now, when you've reached that point, you can ask again to individuals, look, now you've got the machine that's also flagging out not only your personal, but also your non-business emails. We can ask individuals for their consent. Can your successor get just the business emails, just the emails that the machine has flagged up as being business emails? The fifth step then, so now we've reached the point where we've separated business from personal email. Now let's get the machine to make some distinctions within the email account. Let's get the machine to make distinctions between emails from different business activities of the individual. And once we've done that, we've effectively got subgroups within an email account. And so the last step is the first stage we bring in a taxonomy, because having split the email account into subgroups, we can then either get an information management team or end users or the machine to link those subgroupings to a classification. Records managers might want it to be a business classification, or it could be a taxonomy of some kind. Yeah. So at that point, it's so much safer to introduce a taxonomy, because we're not asking the individuals or the machine to tag individual email. Even ask a question at this stage: does the individual there? We've got back to our idealized, we as information professionals, slowly, very carefully, and very, very achieving our, our reintroduction. Please take 5 minutes now to questions.
I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah. Just looking at the looking at these questions. So question from Bertha: to what extent does retention of the most relevant business emails become irrelevant, and are emails worth the effort of storage? Well, this depends on whether we're looking at individual emails or emails as a collection, right? Because if you look at emails one by one, you think that one's not worth much, it's just 2 lines. That one's not worth much, it's just 3 lines. That's just another 1-line email. What use are all of these? But if you think about it, say you have someone in a position, I don't know, they're a senior economist in a bank or a government department or whatever, and they're giving important advice, making important decisions that's really going to impact on the company or the society. We can logically infer that the correspondence of a senior economist now in 2021 is as important as a senior economist in, I don't know, 1987, before email had really hit in the UK. So therefore, their total correspondence has the same value. What email did was to decompose that value, right? So people are still doing the same work, in a sense, the same functions still have to be performed, but the correspondence is chopped into tiny, tiny little bits because we can just ping messages to each other and we don't have to compose things that are worth putting in an envelope and walking over to a post tray and having people ferry it around the country. So I don't think email should be managed as individual items. I think we should manage them on an email account by email account basis. And I think that's the same for Teams chat, instant messaging, anything else. So don't worry if the individual emails seem trivial. From a point of view of retention, think about, is what this person was doing trivial or not, right? If the person was doing a serious job with an impact on their organization or wider world, then their correspondence as a whole will be worth something. And you won't be able to distinguish within that between trivial emails and non-trivial. It's basically a lot of small emails adding up to them pushing forward their work. Feel free to come back, by the way, on if you've got further questions on these answers. Peter, how will this proposal handle new topics unrecognizable to an AI system? I think what I've tried to do with this proposal is to be as unambitious as I possibly could, right? So what I want the AI to do is just two simple things. So the first one is, okay, here's a person, they've built up a lot of correspondence. I want the AI to distinguish within their email account, not across a whole email server. It's just going person by person. Is that business correspondence from that individual or not? Right. So in that sense, there's no new topics. It's not having it's just a classifier, business email of the individual or not. When later, obviously, as the roadmap goes on, it gets more ambitious. So the second thing I having once we're happy that the AI can split business from non-business correspondence, then we want the AI to go into that business correspondence and within the email account, not moving emails out of email accounts because that's risky. Within the email accounts, making distinctions between records from the different types of things that each individual is doing. So if they looked at my email account, it's separated business from non-business. Once I'm happy with that, okay, separate out the different things I do. Yeah, come up with a way, split it into 6. Yeah, and the idea would be that for the machine to split everybody's business email into 6, 7, 8 different groupings that hopefully are useful to the individual. We want them to be useful to the individual because we want the individual to feed back into it. If the AI is coming up with a break of the business correspondence that is useful, that the individual can use to sort their email or to filter their searches, if it's useful, then it's probably right. It's probably useful for future generations as well. If it's not useful, it's probably wrong, right? So all I want the individual to engage with the AI to try and get the individual to train the AI to chop their own individual email into 7 or 8 useful groupings. Yeah, and once the individual is happy with that, then we can pop them a question. You've been using the AI's been on your account. Would you be happy for us to link? And we noticed the AI's created these 6 groupings within your account. Would you be happy for us to link those to whatever taxonomy we've got? So the taxonomy comes in at the very end of the roadmap. So I don't see this as being, we need the AI to be super clever at the start. No, the AI doesn't need to know anything at the start. We're not telling the AI apply this taxonomy to everything. We're just trying to use the AI to make email accounts manageable. And once the email accounts are manageable, once we've identified the business correspondence in it and hopefully made some distinctions within that business correspondence, then we can link to a taxonomy safely, because we've gone through these checks. So we only link to the taxonomy where the individual is happy with the way the groupings have been made, and that those groupings can be linked to a taxonomy. Yeah, and even then, the taxonomy doesn't necessarily have to affect the access. The individual can still keep the access locked right down. Okay, I'm just going through these. What's the next question? Stringed emails. How do you retain stringed emails? I think you just retain them in the email account. like I said, once you take the focus for 25 years has been on how do you identify individual emails and move them to somewhere better. And it's got us nowhere. It's got us absolutely nowhere. So let's not think about individual emails. Let's not try and move emails out of email accounts. Yeah. If they're in a thread, great. If just look at the email collection, look at the email account as a collection, and let's not worry. And let's not worry about duplication. Let's hope there's a lot of duplication in the email system, because what I want is, okay, it would be towards the back end of the roadmap that I talked you through. Okay, you might have missed some of it. I understand the sound difficulties, and apologies for that. But the end of it was reintroducing a taxonomy, but we've got to introduce it safely. What you cannot do is get a great taxonomy, tell your AI, hey, here's this great taxonomy, now run over the whole of the corporate server, from everyone from the board of directors down, and reclassify everyone's email. Yeah, they'd pull the plug within half an hour. Yeah, the minute that someone's one person's private email has been reclassified and made accessible to another, the plug is pulled down. Yeah, so we have to proceed in a way that we don't get the plug pulled out on this. Yeah, so where the duplication helps is, say you've got 8 economists in an organization, right? They'll email each other quite a lot, and those emails will be in their business correspondence when we get our machine to do the dichotomy, and therefore there'll be a lot of duplication between them, right? Now, when you think about applying a taxonomy to a grouping, you could get an analytics tool. You could classify one grouping. What's that? Oh, this grouping looks like it belongs here. Analytics tool, show me the groupings that are like this. Ah, there's these groupings that are like that. Well, what percentage? Well, there's 30% duplication here. Brilliant. Yeah. What we want is to get to a position where an information governance person can, or an information management person can classify the subgrouping on the email account without having to look at the email, because that's a privacy risk if they have to look at individual emails. But if they can look at the title of the grouping, and if they can get an analytics summary of the main topics and do it on that, then maybe you can get some classification from an information manager or a machine without compromising the privacy. Now, here's another question, which is, could we stripping out more personal parts of individual emails? Now, here's a question, if someone sends an email which is 90% about work, but has a little personal note at the end, should that be classified business or non-business? For me, it's business. It's a business email. Someone's added a personal bit at the end, but it's a business email. It has to go in business, right? If the individual has been sending a lot of emails like that and is uncomfortable about anyone seeing their business email, we just give them the right to say, no, I don't want anyone seeing my email. We still keep the email for the length of the business value, because there may be an overriding legal need to see that, and in which case that person's consent is no longer needed because there's an overriding legal need. What about the individuals who delete a lot of email that they consider non-business or personal? Will this impact or help your email vision? It would help. I mean, we've never really known what to tell individuals to do. Do we tell people to delete a lot of email because we think email's a problem and we know there's personal stuff? Or do we tell them not to delete a lot of the email because they might be deleting business email? Right. So what if we got machine learning what we also haven't done is a lot of monitoring. So really, once now we're building up a knowledge base about email, because some organizations have done some machine learning projects. Yeah, and this is where I get the figures from. About 50% of email is business email, because that's what the machine learning projects of organizations that have said to machines, oh, look at email accounts and tell us what's business, what's not. That's the type of figure they're coming up with, right? So if you monitor that, then if someone's deleting 75% of their email every week, then they're probably deleting business emails. And if that's a problem to you, you could have a word with them without impinging on their privacy. It's just you've seen the figures. Yeah, I think that we have to give some level of control to an individual over their email account. There'll be a tension all the way through this between the needs of the organization and the needs of the individual, right? And we just need to be very careful about that balance. What I think would be progress would be to reach a situation where somebody who was doing their job conscientiously could leave a correspondence record for their successor. That's where I want to get to, because that is much easier than getting to a position where you're stopping Machiavellian people from doing bad things like deleting things they shouldn't, right? That will always be hard. That second thing will always be hard. The reason why I'm uncomfortable with some of the approaches we've taken over the past 20 years is that some of those approaches, specifically the ones that say to individuals, oh, it's your responsibility to move emails into document management systems, they made it impossible for someone conscientious to leave behind a good record to their successor. Yeah, and that should be the minimum. The minimum thing we should do is to say we've got to reach a point where a conscientious individual, without making superhuman efforts, could leave behind the same correspondence record they had access to the successor. John's just asked, how do you get user buy-in? Well, I think it's by being very clear about what you're trying to do. I think, and being very clear with the individuals that they have control, in the sense that the machine isn't going to do anything that will surprise them. The machine isn't going to they're not suddenly going to find an email to their line manager appearing in a SharePoint document library that's available to 30 people. That's not going to happen. It's still their email account. We want to make it that their successor can have access to their business emails. In order to do that, we need them to flag up their personal emails that they don't want their successor to have access to. We also will want their consent to do that. We're happy for the individual to withhold their consent until they're happy with the flagging up. We get them to try, and then we introduce machines. With the machines, we make it a bit more ambitious. We say the machine is going to try and separate out not just your personal email, but also anything that just nothing to do with your work. Might be to do with our organization, but it's not to do with our work. And once we get that distinction, then we ask for their consent again. So the buy-in is, look, this is our roadmap, this is our plan, no surprises, no magic, no great black box. This is what the machine will be doing. This is who, these are the circumstances in which someone will be able to see your correspondence. Yeah, after you've given your consent for them to see your business email. Yeah, and this is our long-term roadmap. Yeah, and what's in it for the individual? Hi, Arif.
Hello.
What's in it for the individual is that we no longer have to ask them to move email into other systems. And I think we're going to have to stop asking them anyway, because if the momentum of travel goes as it is and Microsoft Teams takes over the document management space in Microsoft 365 users, you can't ask someone to move an email into a Microsoft team. It just doesn't work. It's not, and you can't ask someone to move a Teams chat message anywhere. The most they could do is take a screenshot. So this is we're not giving up anything by stopping asking them to move emails somewhere else, because they weren't doing it anyway. We're giving up nothing. But we can say to them, we're taking that burden of guilt off them for not doing something which was a policy requirement. Yeah, we're saying to them, look, change your policy, less effort on your behalf, and more benefit to the organization. But we still need you to think. You still have responsibilities as an end user. Arif.
I assume there's no more questions. James, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. And it was a pity that you were just fading away and coming back and all that. So
yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you again. Just to close down this meetup, our next meetup is on 16th of February, and Dr. Tony Russell-Rose will be giving us a talk about basically search theory. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, James. Have a lovely evening, everybody.
Bye, folks.
Thank you very much,
Bye.
James. Great talk.
Thank you very much, both of you.